Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this exclusive webinar, What Can America Learn About DEI from Israel? My name is Laura Morgan, and I'm the Chief of Staff at Do No Harm. Tonight, we are joined by Dr. Stanley Goldfarb, Ian Kingsbury, Tavia Lee, and Jay Green. In mid-February, our four panelists joined a 5-day solidarity trip to Israel organized out of the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. They met with leading college and hospital administrators to learn, among other things, how diversity, equity, and inclusion-related ideologies are implemented in Israeli healthcare and higher education. This journey was discussed in a recent op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. During tonight's webinar, they'll go into greater depth about what they heard and what lessons might be applied to healthcare in the United States. But before we jump in, a few words of introduction for each of our panelists and one housekeeping item. Stanley Goldfarb, MD, is board chairman of Do No Harm. He has had a long career in academic medicine as professor of medicine and associate dean of curriculum at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. He's published over 100 articles in peer-reviewed medical journals and more than 150 invited reviews and commentaries. Dr. Goldfarb founded Do No Harm after publication of his book, Take Two Aspirin and Call Me by My Pronouns, Why Turning Doctors into Social Justice Warriors is Destroying American Medicine. The book is a call to action to eliminate discriminatory practices in healthcare, including elevating diversity above meritocracy in the admission of students to medical school and the hiring of faculty members. Ian Kingsbury, PhD, serves as Director of Research at Do No Harm. His past research in public policy has focused on economic development, education, and healthcare. His work has been frequently cited by regional and national media. Kingsbury received his BA in History and Government from William & Mary, his MA in Education Policy from Teachers College, Columbia University, and his PhD in Education Policy from the University of Arkansas Department of Education Reform. He was previously a postdoctoral fellow at the Johns Hopkins Institute for Education Policy and a research fellow at the Empire Center for Public Policy. Tavia Lee, Doctor of Education, a founding member of Free Black Thought, has contributed to the design, implementation, and evaluation of numerous educational and professional development programs. Her commitment to teacher education and pedagogical design is grounded in her experience as a lifelong educator and a national board-certified English, civics, and social studies teacher in urban American public middle schools. Lee prepares K-12 and higher education faculty to work with diverse communities by focusing on better understanding ideology in practice and the pedagogical and curricular implications of race, gender, and other ideologies. Jay Green, PhD, is a senior fellow at Do No Harm and a senior research fellow in the Center for Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation. His past research has covered a diverse set of topics in the areas of education and health policy. He's recently examined the effect of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones on youth suicide rates, as well as the ways in which diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives have distorted the mission of higher education. Prior to Heritage, Green was at the University of Arkansas, where he served as a distinguished professor and chair at the Department of Education Reform, where he founded and led for 16 years. Green received his BA in History from Tufts University and earned his PhD in Government from Harvard University. After the discussion, our panelists will be happy to answer your questions. Please feel free to submit questions using the button at the bottom of your screen throughout the program, which we will address during the Q&A period. You're welcome to submit your questions anonymously, but please know that even if you don't, your question and name will not be visible to any other attendees. So without further ado, let's get started. So Ian, I'm gonna start out with you this evening. Tell us a little bit about this trip. What prompted it? And why were you all invited?
Sure. So I think sort of the 10,000 foot big picture view is, of course, that all of this goes back to the atrocities on October 7th. And you saw, unfortunately, this scourge of anti-Semitism that washed over college campuses across the United States. And UCLA and the Geffen School of Medicine specifically have just this enormous anti-Semitism problem. I mean, it is a deluge, the stuff that they encounter there and that they have to put up with. So I think both in part is sort of an expression of solidarity to Israel, sort of defiance towards a feckless administration, um, and even I think sort of as a matter of therapy for some of these folks, to go to Israel and see that life there continues, and just to physically be there and experience it. These convergence of factors, these faculty members at the UCLA School of Medicine decided to go on a solidarity trip. And so those of us from Do No Harm were invited because we've been calling attention to issues of radicalism generally and anti-Semitism specifically in medicine, and their intersection with, these ultra woke ideologies and with DEI. So they saw us as people, I think, having some intellectual or moral authority on these issues. And I think they were eager uh, to have us experience this with them, and to really talk through uh, the issues they're encountering at UCLA and what we observed in Israel. So several weeks ago, I tried to summarize that experience in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, as you allude to. It's called "Israel Takes the E Out of DEI," and we can get into this in more detail, and we will. But this was one of the really fascinating things that we learned and we're eager to talk about today, which is that Israel does not have DEI as we know it here in the United States. There's no guarantee of equality of group outcomes. There is constant drive towards equality of opportunity. So yeah, it was a very sobering and difficult experience in some regards, but also a very enlightening and important one in other respects. But I don't want to monopolize our time here. I know others have a lot to say, so let's move on.
Well, let me ask you, I'm sure they did appreciate the support, but you must have detected some divisions among the travelers on how to respond to the anti-Semitism, specifically at UCLA. How would you describe those divisions, and how do you think those differences can be reconciled
Is that a question for me or someone else?
for you?
Sure. Uh, yes, I think truthfully they haven't fully intellectualized, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, um, like how to fix the problems. They know that there's an enormous issue of Jew hatred on their campus, and there's broad recognition that at best, DEI has ignored these issues, and at worst, has actually probably fanned the flames. So, everyone starts at least with that level of recognition. Where to go from there? I think they were, sort of searching for answers, and that was part of, I think, why they wanted to include us. Uh, you know, all of these physicians are sort of accidental activists. They didn't want to have a career in advocacy or politics or what have you, and so they need some guidance here. And so the appeal that we made to them was that DEI is the source of the problem. It's not fixable because Jew hatred is at the core of DEI ideology, and that the system needed to be scrapped altogether, that they should abandon any pretense that it would be wise to try to fold anti-Semitism into DEI. So I think overall we made a good impression and a good case. I can't speak to where exactly all of those folks are right now in terms of those beliefs. But you know, again, things have certainly shifted since October 7th, where there's now at least this broad acknowledgement of the anti-Semitism issue in DEI. So some, you know, a little bit of division or uncertainty of where to go, but at least, you know, now we have sort of this broad consensus in recognizing the issue.
Certainly. Well, and Lee, if I can turn to you real quick, you know, about a lot of this collaboration that took place. We heard that you had met with a young woman on the trip, and she shared quite a bit about her medical school courses and her experience at UCLA. So, what are medical school students at UCLA learning exactly?
Yes, this was one of the most eye-opening things that I encountered, in conversation with some of the students. Some of the required courses that they are being mandated to take. And I did a little research after just to see where these classes and courses came from. And there's been a strong push at UCLA by a group called White Coats for Black Lives, to infuse racial justice and social justice topics. There was a report in 2021 where this particular group, which were students from the UCLA Geffen School of Medicine, their chapter of White Coats for Black Lives, made recommendations to the school, and those recommendations were taken to heart. The student shared with me that, she was being asked to sit through mandatory classes on structural racism and health equity, on topics of systemic racism, on topics of racial justice. There were recommendations made even for recruitment and admission, for the curriculum of the students. And during these exercises, the students must attend. It's not something they can opt out of. They have to be present at these lectures, symposia. They bring in social justice advocates. There's some strange practices that they engage in that some of the students find uncomfortable. This group also made recommendations that the school begin meetings with land acknowledgements, for example, that the students consider renaming the Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center because they claim that Ronald Reagan had implicitly racist beliefs. And these are all being taken to heart and as truth. And then this idea that there is something such as implicit racism or, implicit bias. These are all being held up as fact to our medical students in their trainings, and they're being asked to engage in exercises that signal fidelity to this ideology, land acknowledgements, prayers to ancestors, other things that have nothing to do with competent medical care, or providing background information that's needed to be a competent medical professional. And they talk about systemic racism as fact, and they teach the students that it is a fact, and that as medical professionals they have a responsibility to address it, to learn about it, and to become advocates for patients. So that was something that was deeply concerning to the student, and it starts in year one, and each year they build upon it. So you're really brought into a culture in your first year. You participate in exercises with your fellow students that really do signal a fidelity to a critical social justice ideology, including land acknowledgements and prayer exercises that are questionable in terms of legality even, and not, let alone relevance to medical training.
Definitely some radicalism going on campus there. Stan, as a one faculty member to another, what conversations did you have with the UCLA faculty members on the trip about pushing back against this radicalism on their campus?
Yeah, thank you. And it's great to be with the audience tonight. If you don't hear me too well, it's because my computer decided to act up this evening. So I have to use a secondary source, my phone, for this. I think we were trying to just to follow up on what Ian had to say about what the faculty was dealing with. Many of them did have the idea that what needed to be done was to extend DEI to Jews. Basically, that was their view, and what I think they were hoping to hear at least from in Israel, was how this was accomplished, how you could extend DEI to Jews. Of course, in Israel, the Jews are not a minority group the way they are in the United States. And I think one of the things we tried to impress on them is that, as Ian said, DEI is the problem. The implementation of DEI, the DEI implementation represents the way that identity politics are played out in the college campus and in medical school activities. And once you go down that path, then automatically you start seeing people as members of a group. So what happens with anti-Semitism is Jews are seen as members of this cabal in some people's minds. These characteristics of the group are applied to individuals, and of course many of the characteristics of the group are really mythology. But once you start doing that, then anti-Semitism naturally flows. So that's why we tried to convince them that the solution to this was to really push back against the whole DEI enterprise, because seeing people as members of a group as opposed to individuals is profoundly un-American, and ultimately leads to what you saw in authoritarian communist countries, or what you're now seeing with the rise of anti-Semitism. So I think that was an interesting discussion that we had on, and I think they started to come around to see our point of view. But I must say that the faculty members were predominantly people of the left who had been mugged by the reality of anti-Semitism by people they thought were their fellow travelers in this journey to produce a more, equitable world. In fact, what they're producing is a world that's just full of hate and divisiveness, unfortunately.
It is unfortunate. And I know Jay has some things to weigh in here on. So Jay, I'll ask you to follow up on the things that your fellow panelists have mentioned, and to tell us whether or not you see any signs of hope that things might improve at UCLA eventually.
Well, there are actually some encouraging signs. I mean, first, not only did everyone learn a lot, including all of us on that trip. It was an amazing experience. But I think they began to get organized and see that they had to advocate for their interests together as a group, and that they had to bring in powerful allies to be more effective in making their case. And they're beginning to do that. Now, whether that yields results is yet to be seen, but I actually expect it will. I mean, we had a meeting with President Herzog of Israel, met with our group visiting, and he gave a lot of really good advice. He basically took the attitude, stop whining, start doing things. And he was very concrete about what to do. So he said, have you talked to this person? Have you talked to that person? I know that person. I could give him a call. And it was that kind of attitude and modeling of taking action that I think inspired the group from UCLA similarly to take action and to think about who they needed to contact to achieve their goals. And they're going to do it, especially because the facts are with them. I mean, things are bad there, as Lee and Ian have been saying. I mean, it's astounding, and people may not believe it, but I mean, I'll give one factoid that's astounding, which is that the student on the trip was telling us that she has 2 Jewish students in her cohort of 140 students. And the thought that a medical school would have in Los Angeles would have, 1% Jewish enrollment is a very low number, much lower than you would expect. And so something is going on there. I mean, it used to be that UCLA, a number of the faculty are themselves graduates of UCLA, and they said, we thought the place was like 40-50% Jewish when we were there, 15, 20 years ago, and now it's 1%. What happened in the interim? Well, some of this is the result of DEI, right? If underrepresentation is evidence of oppression, then overrepresentation is evidence of having oppressed. And Jews were overrepresented because in the country they're 2-3%. But at UCLA, they were 30-40%. They need to be brought down. And they've succeeded in that project of bringing the number of Jews down to 1-2%. That's success in the world of DEI, but from the perspective of effective medical practice, meritocracy, and anti-Semitism, it's a complete disaster. And that's the kind of thing that you're seeing going on at UCLA. That they're organizing to fight back. I think they're going to ultimately succeed.
So if I just might contribute to that a little bit, it's important to recognize and acknowledge and call out BS from the other side when we see it. One thing I hear a lot is they say DEI and equity, it's not a zero-sum game. Well, there's only so many people who can become doctors, right? There is a practical limit. And so if you want to increase representation from one group, it must come at the expense of representation from another group. And I hate to even think about things in this way, right? We should just be focusing on the individual and their achievements. But there is an obvious math problem here that they're deflecting from, which is that if you want to increase representation from one group, it comes at the expense of another. So that's what Jay's describing, and we shouldn't let that fact go unchallenged.
Another
Yeah.
piece of advice, just wanted to add in there for the faculty that I gave to individual faculty members is they really need to reclaim their authority on the campus. So these recommendations for advancing anti-racism praxis have come from students. It's from the students at the UCLA Geffen School of Medicine. They're White Coats for Black Lives chapter. And really the educators, the faculty who remain there from year to year as these students cycle in and out, they've ceded their authority for designing curricula, for designing programs to students, and they've allowed them to advance this anti-racist praxis upon the whole medical school without pushing back, without saying, what is this? What is it rooted in? What are the philosophies we're adopting? How will it affect, our students as they go out into the world? So it's I think it's incumbent upon those faculty members to reclaim that and for their senates to start doing their jobs again. And that means setting curricula. It's not a job of a student to do or student activists to do.
Well, and you're certainly an expert in that field, Lee. And in what ways did you discover that DEI in Israel is different than DEI in the United States?
So in Israel, what I noticed when we visited multiple campuses throughout Israel, I saw the faculty taking more of a role in the organization of their departments, in the way that diversity was approached, the way that inclusion was approached. And I saw a lot of leadership from faculty when they talked about how they were navigating post-October 7th, the diversity of opinions within the community of the students. How were they making spaces where all the students felt that they could be heard and, and that their viewpoints were being valued? It was faculty-led, not student-led. They weren't putting it in the hands of students or like activists from the streets or, anywhere else. They were saying, this is our community as a faculty and we value it and we want it to flourish. And so, we're making these spaces so that our students of all backgrounds can feel like they have a place to come and speak about, the complex topics and that they're welcome. So there was a lot of talk about belonging, inclusion, diversity of thought among the faculty members, and it was guided by the faculty members. We've lost that here in America, and we can really learn from Israel about faculty leadership and the strong importance of it, and not ceding it to various activist groups that may come in and out of an institution.
Well, sure. And in many ways, it seems Israel does DEI better than the United States. Could someone reasonably look at the intense political, ethnic, religious fractures in Israel and conclude that their model of DEI isn't working either? Stan, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that was really the essence of Ian's point in his op-ed piece. So I'm going to defer to him and give him a chance to sort of go through the information in that, because I think that he really hit the nail on the head when he went through that.
If I might give a sort of borrow from Jewish history a little bit here, Jewish tradition, things could always be worse, right? So, that's true that Israel has some pretty serious fault lines along political, ethnic, religious lines. But I think it would be unwise to say that the solution to them is American style DEI. And, they should look over here and just see that that's not doing anything to make things better over here. Why would it do anything to make things better over there? The way that it operates here is we see it. It pins one group against another. It tries to, it tries to seek justice for one group against another and bringing up all of these historical grievances. And the approach that they have there, certainly within their healthcare settings, is to say, we have to try to put these things aside and work towards a common purpose. One of the most illuminating things actually is we were at Rambam Hospital in northern Israel, and the director of the hospital there was telling us on October 7th, they were taking in extra patients from the south because, you had obviously this mass casualty event. And a lot of the Jewish doctors were off because it was a holiday or they couldn't be reached. And the non-Jewish doctors all, without being told they had to, all swarmed to get to the hospital to treat all of these patients because they are, again, they're unified in that purpose and understanding that their job first and foremost is just to treat people and make them better. So, American style DEI is definitely not the solution for the problems, that they do have over there.
Just to sort of follow up on that a bit, also, I think one of the most amazing things that we saw when we went into these hospitals, when we visited these huge academic medical centers, Sheba Hospital and the Tel Shamir Hospital, these are world famous hospitals, the largest in the Middle East. They're filled with people, women in hijabs. They're filled with Palestinian people, both as patients and as staff. And as was pointed out, we were talking a little bit earlier, on October the 8th and October the 7th, the staff all showed up that were Palestinian to treat patients. And the leadership of many aspects of the hospital are Palestinians. And I think the most dramatic number that we heard was that in the Sheba Hospital, which is the largest pediatric hospital, 30% of the patients are Palestinians, and they're Palestinians from the West Bank. So if a child is really ill in the West Bank, they go to the local hospital in the West Bank. If they have a serious medical problem that requires great expertise, they're sent to Sheba Hospital, or they sent to Tel Shamir. And the ward, the 30% of the patients in the pediatric ward at Sheba Hospital were Palestinian children. So this idea, I think in the New York Times today, there was a long piece by a Palestinian commentator, somebody and there's never a mention of this reality. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about the whole academic enterprise in Israel. But for example, at the Technion, one of the great technical and scientific universities in the world, something like 20 or 30% of the students are in various fields are Palestinian students. They have to pass exams. They have to do well to get there. But as Ian has talked about, they increase their ability to train students as a way of increasing diversity, rather than trying to just elevate people who don't belong in those institutions and really need to go to less elite institutions where they can be more competitive. They don't have that problem there. Anyone that can be competitive has a chance to be competitive, which is great.
Let me just add 3 quick principles that we heard from the director of diversity at Hebrew University, an Arab woman, that kind of defined the approach to DEI in Israel very different from in the US. The first principle was that they do not alter standards for different groups. Everyone has to meet the same standard. Okay, so they're trying to achieve greater diversity, but without altering any standards. They have the same fairly objective standards that they apply to all groups. So the way they try to achieve it is outreach. They make efforts to recruit, to encourage applications, and that's how they do it. The second thing they do, which speaks to Ian's point earlier about the zero-sum problem of DEI, is that they only do it in circumstances where the opportunities are not zero-sum. So they increase recruitment when they can expand the pool of available spots. And that allows it so that they don't pit one group against another. And then the third quick principle, which we heard from the president of Technion University, is he said he wakes up every morning and thinks to himself, what do I have to do today to help the security of the state of Israel? Now, the thought that a university president would have this as his first thought every morning is amazing. But it means that the institution as a whole thinks of diversity and inclusion as serving ultimately a unifying national purpose, and not as a tool for the particular interest of any one group. And I think those three principles really marked how distinctive DEI was in Israel, and distinguished it from the counterproductive approach we see in the United States.
Oh, sure. And Lee, what can you add to how Israeli universities treat employees and students from non-Jewish backgrounds, and how they live diversity and inclusion without the equity?
Yes, I just add on to what Jay mentioned. I saw a strong commitment to being Israeli first, whether we're talking about Arabs or Ethiopians or Jewish people. Their commitment was to Israel first. And I really appreciated the way that there were strong standards for all that were equal. There wasn't a lessening of a standard for any one group or another group. It's one standard, it's merit-based. And to advance or to, move up the ranks in the academic world, if you will. And I saw a lot of attention to that, being Israeli first, regardless of the background of the person, where they came from, how they landed in Israel. They landed there with a deep commitment to the nation and to the community that they were in. And I saw that also in their hospitals, which was really something that was amazing, just the staff, how everyone spoke of, they're there to serve the patients, no matter who they are or where they're from or what their background is, what their socioeconomic background or religious, that all of those things weren't at play. It was a focus on excellence, a focus on merit, a focus on strong standards for all, and not lowering or diluting the standards for different groups like we do here in America, which is such a harmful practice as we're seeing, and it leads to the erosion of society, not innovation and advancement. Definitely.
Yes, well, and it was mentioned early on about how some of the things on the trip may have been a little bit more difficult. And during the trip, you all must have learned about how Israelis are coping with the aftermath of the October 7th attack and the resulting war. So how do you think the people you met were faring? Stan, feel free to lead us up on that discussion.
Sure. I'll talk about one individual I met who was at Technion. He was a molecular biologist and a very accomplished person, and a relatively young man. And I asked him about his thoughts about where everything was going. And he said something to me that I think sort of summed it all up. He said, "We have absolutely no trust in our Palestinian neighbors." So even though they've made all these great attempts to integrate Palestinians into Israeli life, and there are 2 million Palestinian Israelis who have citizenship in Israel, they have no trust, and because they have no trust, that's why we're seeing the kind of aggressive war that they've waged, because they realize that there's just no living side by side with people who are dedicated to killing you. That's just not feasible, and they really don't see any other approach that they can take except the one that they're taking. They just can't assume it. We heard that at that point there were 200,000 Israelis who had to leave their homes, either at the border in the north with Hezbollah or in the border in the south near Gaza, that were displaced into hotels and various places, and they couldn't return to their homes because up in the north, literally a rocket propelled grenade, it could be shot into someone's home. That's how close some of the homes were to the border. And of course, in the south, we got to visit the kibbutzim that were attacked. Kibbutz Be'eri was the one that we spent time in. The only way we could describe the the people that were there and the ones who showed us around they were still in shock. And this was quite a bit after, the event. And they saw their neighbors killed. They saw 3 waves of attack, both real Hamas troops and then locals who came in, and then finally looters who came in following the locals. And so the idea that they can trust is really virtually gone. So I think that was one kind of sense I got. A tremendous resoluteness that they were going to, persevere through all this, but also a tremendous loss of trust. And then, of course, we had the opportunity to meet with some of the hostage families, and saw, the great pain that this was inflicting on the Israeli people, and particularly the families. I know that that's even become more of an issue lately, trying to decide, how they can move forward in some way to resolve some of these issues and get some of the hostages home. But there's just a great deal of pain in that country, and it's totally understandable. And remember, on a per capita basis, what happened at the border around Gaza would be the equivalent of 50,000 Americans being killed in a terrorist attack. And the idea that, we could tolerate that and not unleash some sort of effort to make sure that never happened again, I think is really impossible to conceive of.
Yes. Jay, what do you have to contribute?
Well, so I mean, I entirely agree. It was I heard the word trauma more times during that week than I had ever heard in the rest of my life, and it's real. There was some encouraging news. I mean, one of the silver linings was being able to witness the steely determination of Israelis to win. They're determined to win and confident of winning. And we saw that in particular when we visited an Air Force base. I don't know how we managed to get into, but we did. We visited a base where F-35s are housed and watched them take off and land. And we got a briefing from an F-35 pilot. And I have to tell you, for all the problems and all the trauma they've experienced, they have some very impressive stuff, and these are very impressive people, and they're going to win. What exactly winning looks like and how long that takes, I don't know. But I walked out of that Air Force base feeling a lot better than I had for the other parts of that visit.
Great. And Ian, I'd love to hear a story from you, and then also about just the general national mood in Israel.
Yeah, so coming back to this idea of trauma, I mean, it really, it's sort of clarifying to understand what trauma really looks like. So for all of these medical students in the United States who think it's traumatic to be misgendered or microaggressed against, Stan mentioned the Kibbutz Be'eri, where we went one day, one of the main massacre sites on October 7th. And the gentleman who showed us around, I mean, in some ways he was lucky. He happened to be away that day. His family was away that day. So no one in his family was hurt, but his neighbors were murdered or kidnapped. And he said he can never move back into the physical home that he lived in. I think it's too painful and again, too traumatic to think about even going back there. So he didn't seem fully sure of what his future plans were, but this man was spiritually broken. It's a trauma that I think most of us thank God can't even begin to relate to. So the national mood is somber, truthfully. Normally this is a country with sort of a no nonsense can do attitude, and you could just see it on people's faces and even in the streets that things are difficult over there right now. But I would echo what Jay said, that ultimately they have the resolve to win, and they know they'll win. So at least there's that.
Yes, and that can-do attitude in the face of adversity is some good advice we could take as well. So thank you, Stan, Ian, Lee, and Jay, for these excellent insights. And we'll now move into the Q&A portion of this evening's event. Please feel free to submit a question if you haven't done so already using the button at the bottom of your screen. While we hope to answer many of the questions posed, please know that we will not be able to answer them all. You can make your question totally anonymous by checking the box, but even if you don't, your question and your name will not be visible by your fellow attendees. So let me get to the first question here. I'm gonna read it off, and then whoever would like to take this on, just let me know. When we take down American DEI, is the answer a corrected form of DEI committee? Not saying that's our message, but if it were, wouldn't that be a confusing message for us to give? Isn't DEI wrong for other reasons, such as its obsession with political power, and that being a dangerous bureaucracy to let live, even if it's going okay in Israel?
I agree. I mean, while we saw it being done better in Israel, I still, I'm not super comfortable with the idea of these bureaucracies attempting to perform these functions, because the potential for mission creep is very high, and the attraction of power grabs too great. And we'd probably be better off if we could stay merit focused and not have these DEI bureaucracies at all.
Israel respects their history and makes it about Israel first, but critical race theory ideology has led to changing how people view America, leading to an America is bad mentality. National pride is at a low. So how can we combat that when the ideology is so expansive in all levels of learning?
Yes, I think it's something that we see Israel has not had to combat and deal with a critical social justice ideology, more appropriately than just CRT. Because this is something that has infected American institutions and educational spaces. That's why we see our medical doctors having to learn about race and racism and power and colonialism and patriarchy and capitalism and all these things that don't have anything to do with, providing competent medical care. That's become the focus of not just our medical schools, but our K through 12 schools, our community colleges. All levels of American education are focusing on that. And it's a very anti-American approach. I really appreciate how the question posed pointed that out. There's an America is bad mentality. Everything that's wrong with America. We've lost the focus on, pluralism, the various groups that have struggled against, great discrimination and adversity, and been able to rise above that and to become successful and to become great contributors to the nation. That's not being taught in our schools, and that's not being learned. And so you can't apply what you haven't learned or been taught. So there really needs to be a reform from K through 12 on up into our medical schools, especially with rooting out this ideology, this anti-American sentiment. It is intentional. It's intended to destroy the nation and the values that it was founded upon. And if you listen to the people that come to talk at these structural racism and health equity classes, they openly just state they want a dismantling of the system. They want to bring it all down. They want to burn it down. It's a very destructive, nihilistic way of thinking and being in the world. And that's what our medical professionals are being taught. And that's what they're being taught from K through 12 all the way up through medical school. So there needs to be a complete reform of the curricula. And we need to get a focus back on American values and American pluralism and e pluribus unum, out of many one. We've forgotten some basic principles of American education, and it's really affecting us now. And when we look to other nations like Israel, who put Israel first, Israel's a nation with 21% Arab Israelis. And what I saw when I spoke to people and some of the hostage families, they weren't distrustful of their neighbors. They realized that the entire nation was under attack, whether you were a Jewish person, an Arab person, an Ethiopian person, whether you were a Thai visitor, you were attacked and killed just for being in Israel. So it's an attack on the entire nation, and that's how they view it. And I've really seen them come together. I fear for America if there should ever be anything like that here, because we are so divided and we've lost the fundamentals of American education and even just basic foundational knowledge of the American enterprise. If students don't know it, they just know what their teachers are teaching them. And that's a bunch of slogans and how to be activists and get out in the streets, and how to be advocates and activists instead of competent professionals.
So I agree with this 100%. If I might just piggyback a little bit, I mean, it really is shocking the extent to which these radicals hate America and don't believe in America. So much of what we see really is just downstream of that. So I was writing the other day in City Journal about issues in Black maternal mortality, and specifically with preeclampsia, which is more frequent in African American women, something that likely has both genetic and behavioral explanations. But of course, their default hypothesis is that it must be an indictment of how awful the United States is. And so, it's basically you begin with that position of the United States is awful, and you work out from there. It's a real problem.
Definitely. I know that you have done a lot of looking into some of the UCLA materials. I don't know if anybody actually knows this. One of the participants is asking whether we know about the grading system at UCLA Medical School, about pass-fail versus other kind of grades, but it does seem to de-emphasize excellence in any case.
So I don't know about the specifics of their grading system. What we did here is that there has been a complete and total erosion of academic standards. They're not screening their applicant pools by conventional metrics like GPA and MCAT scores. They're just playing these identity politics games. And then once they're into medical school, they're focusing on all of this nonsense activism that Lee was talking about at the expense of real medical training. And so you have scores of students who are failing basic exams, and of course, who are just pushed through the process and end up graduating anyway. But no, I mean, unsurprisingly, the radicalism that you see there coincides with an enormous educational failing.
Didn't we hear about a big increase in step 1 failure rates? Isn't that right?
What the number 30% was thrown around,
Yeah.
which is unfathomable. I mean, what is it usually 3%?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting issue because what happened was the step 1, which is the first part of the licensure exam, was, as was implied, was turned from an exam in which people had grades, and those grades were used sort of like an achievement test for residency programs to decide who really would qualify for the most competitive residency programs. It was only the ones who got the first were in the top 5 or 10% of the grades on that exam. What they did was they turned it into a pass-fail exam, so the students stopped studying for it. So that was a big part of the high failure rate, is they just didn't care anymore, and then knew they could take it again. And that's what goes on in medical school. As you said, now virtually no one flunks out of medical school, because if they fail an exam, they get to take it again. If they don't pass the second time, they get to take an oral exam. Everything is pass-fail in the first 2 years in virtually all the medical schools in the United States in the preclinical years. And in the clinical years, everyone's afraid to give bad grades, because if you give bad grades, you can be called a racist. So the whole system is really imploding on itself. Now, there are plenty of very bright medical students. There are plenty of them that are working hard and studying hard. Many of them are fine and are going to make wonderful doctors. But it's in the bell-shaped distribution, you worry about the tail that really is less capable. And I've estimated those numbers are anywhere from 600 or 700 to 12 or 1,300 every year are pumped out into the American healthcare system that just shouldn't be there.
Very good. Well, this will be our last question of the evening, and I'd like to start with you, Jay, but then to have all the panelists weigh in on this. The questioner asked, I've never been able to understand anti-Semitism from biblical times through the Holocaust, and now these protests on college campuses. I'm a Catholic, and 2 of my very best friends in medical school were Jewish. Can you explain the genesis of this irrational hatred of Jewish people?
So we probably don't have enough time for a full explanation, but to kind of get maybe at the heart of it is that Jews play a useful role for people in that if you want to understand why, and at the heart of it is the relative success of Jews, particularly their survival over time. Right, that's the insult that that Jews perpetrate on others, is surviving and thriving even in hardship. And so it puts a burden on other groups sometimes to say, well, why do they have when I don't? And I think this is a particular issue in the medical field. Jews have done very well in the field of medicine and risen to lots of prominent positions in the field, in academic medicine, in research circles, in journals, and then it's tempting for others to say, well, how do they have all those things? What do they do to get all those things? Why do I not have them? Why do other people like me not have them? And then that invitation for envy is I think at the root of it. But I don't know if others have better explanation than that. But I think that this kind of resentment of Jewish survival and thriving in the face of oppression is at the root of this problem.
Yeah, I'm afraid it goes back to the time when the Greeks ruled in Israel, what was Israel then, several thousand years ago. And I think if anyone's really interested, Simon Schama has a wonderful book, The History of the Jews, which really does go into the history of anti-Semitism right up to the present time. And there are lots of reasons, not the least of which is, the role of Jews in Christ's life. That was one, certainly an issue, but it started way before that. And there was this certain difference. The Jews held themselves up as a people apart, and that was part of it as well. But I think Jay summarized a lot of it quite well.
Very good.
So James Lindsay recently commented that it's not really about the Jews per se, it's about the revolution. And I think he's right. It's not necessarily animated by concerns that these are especially or uniquely evil or terrible people, but that as Jay was alluding to, their perceived status as part of the ownership class, or even people who have these these funny rituals or believe in God, that they're a problem for the revolution that these people are trying to foment. So if Jews go and wave around a Hamas flag and say, I denounce Israel and my fellow Jews, that's fine for them. It's not like that sort of blood and soil strand of anti-Semitism where just all Jews have to die. There is a way to make way for the revolution, but that is really, I think, what's driving most of the anti-Semitism you see right now.
Lee, any closing thoughts?
I would just echo what Ian said. It's definitely rooted in some of the ideologies we've seen throughout history, including communist ideology. That a lot of the foundations of these philosophies of critical social justice are guided towards that. And that's unfortunately what's being taught to our medical professionals and even our kindergarten students. And we need to be more vigilant about that. And I think that faculty, especially in higher education space, they must reclaim their roles and their duties and responsibilities to the academy. They've ceded those to activists, to people who are not educators, and that needs to stop. We need to be more accountable as education professionals and leaders in our institutions, and we need to muster up the moral courage to reclaim what we've given over, wrongly given over to others.
Very good. Well, thank you all again for sharing more with us about this really important trip and about what you learned regarding the crossover between DEI and anti-Semitism, and teaching us about that as well. We're also grateful to all of you who joined us for this exclusive webinar. We're grateful for your continued support of Do No Harm's mission and work. To read more about the topic of DEI and as it relates to anti-Semitism, as well as about Do No Harm's other work to dispel identity politics from medical education, research, and practice, please visit donoharmmedicine.org and click on the Newsroom tab for the latest updates and our many reports on these important topics. Thank you and have a good night.